So this afternoon, or this evening, I'd like to talk about the agile attitudes and abilities that make up a great Scrum Master, iteration manager, agile coach, or any other type of servant leader. Now, before going on with the topic, I would just like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'll start off by just mentioning the fact that I'm actually a Scrum guy. You've heard today about all the different flavors that sit under the Agile umbrella. I'm a Scrum guy, and the reason I'm mentioning this to you is that throughout the presentation, I'm going to be using a lot of Scrum terminology, but it's important to note that even though it is Scrum terminology, the underlying concepts are far broader. So when I say use terms like Scrum Master, feel free to switch it out for whatever flavor of Agile you prefer. Now, my background is actually in traditional PM. It seems like a different lifetime now. So I did the PMP thing and the Prince 2 thing, and I'm going to come back to this point a little bit later because it's pertinent. So on the flip side, I've been an Agilist for almost a decade now, starting off with some XP practices, and I've been practicing Scrum very heavily for about half that time, so about half a decade. I now blog about Scrum. I blog at scrumshortcuts.com, and I talk about different approaches to the various Scrum practices. Remember that the Agile frameworks are just that, they're frameworks, and there's different ways to apply them, so that's what I talk about there. And I've been very fortunate. The blog got picked up by Mike Cohn himself, and I'm in the process right now of actually turning the blog into a book that will form a part of the Mike Cohn signature series. So that's really exciting, and that's what I'm focusing on at the moment. If anyone's interested in reading some draft chapters, giving me their opinion, please get in touch. I would value that. So apart from that, I've just had my first child, and a book and a baby, that is a real lesson in agility, I can tell you that. So let's get back to the topic. Attitudes and abilities. So why is this important? Why should we care? What really are the implications if we get this wrong? So I contend, in fact, that if we do not understand the true abilities and attitudes that make up a great Scrum Master, what it could actually lead to, the eventual demise of the whole Agile movement. Now, I know that's very melodramatic, but hey, guys, I'm competing with beer o'clock, right? So you got to do what you got to do. Drama aside, the Scrum Master role is so integral to the success of any Agile or Scrum adoption that if we don't get it right, it could relegate a beautiful Agile world to a relic of the past. Okay, with that intro, let's actually go back to basics now, and I'm just going to go through a quick definition of the Scrum Master. Make sure we're all on the same page here. So the Scrum Master is the coach, facilitator, impediment remover, and servant leader. I'm going to come back to that term in a minute. Of the Scrum team providing process leadership. They're also the person who helps the Scrum team and the rest of an organization develop their own high-performance, organization-specific Scrum approach. And I'm going to reiterate the fact, you've probably heard this several times today, that Scrum is not a method, it's not a prescribed formula. You don't follow it step by step. So a big role of the Scrum Master is to take this framework and apply it on a setting-by-setting basis. So you'll see Scrum implementations vary from team to team, from company to company. Okay, now that we're on the same page, let's explore this seemingly contradictory role, that is the servant leader. Sounds really strange, right? Now this term, some of you may have read the work of Robert Greenleaf. I guess this is the guy who's popularized the term in our sort of modern setting, but the reality is this concept's really ancient. You see it everywhere. Now, a Scrum Master has to lead implicitly. They have to use a more subtle brand of leadership. And why do they have to do this? Well, Scrum Masters don't have preordained butt-kicking authority, okay? They must lead without authority. Now that also sounds really weird, right? They're expected to lead and they do not have authority. How does that work? I'm sure many of you will agree with me that sort of joining a group can be really hard, right? Pre-formed groups, quite hard to join a group. Now, it's really hard to lead a group, and it's incredibly hard to lead a group without authority. So this is where I'm talking about a more subtle brand of leadership. And it requires a very special type of person or dog. And true leaders, they really don't need authority. They shouldn't require authority. And I tell you what, they really don't require force. Look at any dictator, they have to rely on force. Servant leaders are not about that. So what are the qualities of a true servant leader? Well, I've listed a few here. There are many others, but let's talk about 4. So firstly, a servant leader cannot have ego. There's no place for big fat ego on a Scrum team. They need to be extremely approachable. Remember, they are a guide. They're guiding the team. If anyone is afraid to come up and ask them a question, that's not a good situation to find yourself in. They need to be calm and logical under pressure. Now, sure, a dictator may be able to rant and rave and still have people do their bidding. When you're a servant leader, you can't do that. You have to remain calm and logical. And the 4th thing I'll just mention there is that they need to have a genuine care for not just the product, but also for the team. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I've worked with many managers who are very passionate about their product. They care so much about it, every little detail. But they tend to forget that products get developed by people. So a Scrum Master needs to be able to focus on both. I'd like to now talk about another one of these funny terms, self-organizing teams. Now, the creation of a self-organizing team is another one of those goals of a Scrum Master. Setting the boundaries around this self-organization is something a Scrum Master needs to be really good at. Now I really like this analogy. The Scrum Master needs to act as that wise wizard who guides the team towards this auspicious goal by serving and leading. Now, I picked up this analogy actually reading Jürgen Appello's Management 3.0. And he mentions that it's really interesting. In any fancy book or fancy movie, you always see, while the wizard doesn't necessarily jump in and get involved in the nuts and bolts, they always seem to appear just at that right time with some sage advice or jumping in to help their hobbits or their Hogwarts students around some particularly hairy situation, right? So that's what the Scrum Master needs to be, the wise wizard. And cool. This is actually Gandalf, pretty cool. Right, so I'm actually concerned. I've got a few issues. Why am I concerned? Well, I'd like to talk about a couple of problems that I'm actually seeing out there. And this is a globally, I'm seeing this everywhere that I go. And what I'm seeing is that our industry it's really progressing. Just look at this conference. It's an amazing turnout. I I think it's awesome. 850 people, that's brilliant. And what this is indicating is that Agile, Scrum, these terms are becoming quite commonplace now. Forums online springing up all the time. Classified jobs are appearing for Agile and Scrum everywhere. And that's cool, that's great. But my problem is that I just don't think everyone's getting it. What do I mean? I'm going to focus on two of these issues that I see. The first one is that I see a serious focus on functions. Now, what do I mean by that? There are a number of sort of daily operational functions that the Scrum Master performs. The facilitation of retrospectives, sprint planning, iteration planning, whatever you want to call it, estimation sessions, setting up burn down charts, etc. There's a lot of focus on this, and I read a lot of the forums, and there's a lot of debate and discussion around day-to-day functions. I'll just show you some evidence of what I'm talking about. Now, what I actually did in preparation for this talk was I did a whole bunch of searches on classifieds. Now, if Simon's in the room, no, I didn't use Seek. I actually went to Monster just to protect anyone in the room who may be guilty here. So I've gone to the US. But suffice to say, this is reflective of pretty much anywhere. Now, what I actually did was analyze a whole bunch of these classifieds. And I used a sort of traffic lights system here to identify various elements of the ad. Now, red indicated pretty much an utter disregard for Agile philosophies and practices. Yellow was a focus on functions, and green was good. Unfortunately here, there's no green. Now, I was going to actually protect the guilty here, but I thought, you know what, I want you to see this is a real ad. You can look this up. And if anyone from City's here, that they can give their US counterparts a call and get them some free HR consulting here. But the fact is, you look at a lot of the red items. Let's pick a couple here. Effective at leading and motivating team members to perform at a pace that is at times grueling. Yeah. Hello, sustainable development? No. How about adherence to all documentation standards, practices, and tools? Interesting. And I like this. The Agile Scrum Master monitors progress on an hourly basis. Yeah, I was never taught that. So yeah, the yellow I was speaking about is a real focus on those day-to-day functions, which, while not as problematic, let's say, as the red, I still see them as an issue because it is trivializing this deep role. As you can see, plans, upcoming sprint, reviews, product backlog, etc., etc. I've got another one. Now this one is a little bit better. We see some green, hooray. So green, for example, I don't mind this. Shield teams from external influences, facilitate removing impediments. That's okay. As you can see on the right, there's still a heavy focus on those functions. Daily stand-up meetings, Scrum of Scrums, report impediments, etc. But I love that one in the bottom right-hand corner. Proficient in MS Project. Bath. Poor MS Project. We really give it a kicking, don't we? Okay, so what, apart from the red items, yeah, they're obviously, we've got some issues going on here. But more dangerous, I think, is focusing on the functions, because what it implies to us is that the Scrum Master role it's just a coordination role. It's just a facilitation role. Whereas in reality, this is just the tip of the iceberg. It is a deep and very complex role. We have to understand that as we inspect and adapt, Remember, inspection and adaptation is really fundamental to what we do in Scrum. But as we inspect and adapt, Scrum as a framework will also inspect and adapt. Functions will change. Functions may be deprecated. We may add more functions. They'll evolve. And so instead, we need to focus more on attitudes. I'm not saying we shouldn't be aware of the functions, and we should be certainly proficient at doing them, no question, but it shouldn't be our primary focus. Attitudes and abilities are more constant and they're more fundamental. If we get those right, functions will follow later. So what not to do? I'll tell you what we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't just be bestowing this Scrum Master title on people just because they did a couple days of training, or just because they know the rules back to front. They read the Scrum Guide, etc. Or even if they've read a whole ton of these books. No, we should be bestowing this upon people who are able to demonstrate the correct attitudes and abilities. I'm going to talk about 4 of them that I really like. The first one is the ability to enact change without fear. Those who can be diplomatic without being political. Those who can be selfless without downplaying the importance of their role. And those who can be protective of their teams without being overprotective. Those who can achieve these goals here, they are really embodying the underlying ethos of what it means to be a servant leader and a Scrum Master. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. Enacting change without fear. Now, I really love this quote, this Woodrow Wilson quote. If you want to make enemies, try to change something. This is really, really true. And why is it true? Well, change is scary. Change takes people out of their comfort zones. It changes the status quo. It turns power bases on their head. Now, if someone were to come to me right now and say, what is the key role of a Scrum Master? I don't know anything about this Scrum Master thing. What is their key role? My answer would be that the key role is that of change agent. A change agent needs to be a superb educator. They need to be able to relate to any area of an organization. They need to be able to relate to the CXO level, the team level, their peers. They need to be able to teach this new, scary new framework. They also need to be a great salesperson. They need to be able to promote the benefits across the board. These skills aren't trivial. Now, it can be really, really easy to come to a great event like this, or to go to some training session, or read a good book, and get really excited and pumped about change, and going back into the organization and wanting to change everything all at once. I've certainly been guilty of this, I admit that. You want to go in, it's just great. The sooner everything is implemented, the better. But a great change agent will be able to observe, take their time, understand who they're dealing with, understand their stakeholders, understand their technical environment, their physical environment, the third parties they need to deal with. They need to gauge the organization and the team's readiness for change. They might choose to implement a pilot. That's an approach I personally really, really like. They may change via the introduction of elements slowly, one by one. And in some cases, they may even feel that the organization is so ready for this that they can go with a big bang approach. The point is that a great Scrum Master is not just going to rush in. They are going to gauge the readiness and understand what they're dealing with before they go in and rush it out. Remember, you have one chance to make a first impression. Let's look at the next one here, diplomatic but not political. So the Scrum Master really, think of them as the hub connecting the spokes. But in reality, these spokes are actually big, ugly silos, departmental silos that have traditionally been very disparate from one another. And yet, with Scrum, we need them working very closely, hand in glove, to make this thing work. I think silos in many cases is actually quite generous. Fortresses would be another. Seriously, you just see fortresses, departmental fortresses, all supposedly working towards the same common goal, and yet trying to protect themselves from the other tribe. So how do we break this down? Well, a great Scrum Master has a genuine respect for all the roles involved. A Scrum Master is going to come from a certain background, but they can't show a bias towards that background. They really have to understand and appreciate all the roles. That sounds pretty simple, but it's not. They need to be able to also promote those benefits, both individual and broader benefits, to the different groups. The products team needs to understand the benefits to them. The development team, they need to come together into that one team. There can be no hidden agendas, and really what you see is what you get with the Scrum Master. Behaving selflessly without downplaying the role. So I really like this analogy, this Tour de France analogy. Now, considering for the first time ever we are defending the Tour de France, everyone knows what it is, right? Okay. So the Tour de France, I'll just quickly recap, is a grueling 3,500 kilometer race which is regarded as the toughest sporting event on the planet. It's over 2-3 weeks and over Alps and Pyrenees mountain ranges. It's sheer madness. And while there is a single so-called champion, the reality is it's actually a team event, with the team working together to protect and propel their team lead across the finish line. Now, my favorite part of the tour is at the end of each stage, or many of the stages, there's a sprint finish. Now, for those who are fans of the tour, this sprint finish it's bedlam. You've got hundreds of bikes riding at breakneck speed, very close quarters. It's extremely dangerous. And there's a particularly selfless role on a Tour de France cycling team. It's called the lead-out man. And what this lead-out man has to do during this melee of cyclists is protect and guide their team lead through the mess, through the obstacles, through any fallen bikes, and they're going at serious speed. They act as the windbreaker as well, taking a lot of energy. Now, what will happen when the lead-out man finally breaks through? You'll see they are utterly spent. And what they'll do, they'll just drop back into the group of riders and watch their team captain race to that finish line. They're watching back from a distance. The Scrum Master is that lead-out man, guiding, protecting the team to victory without actually claiming it at the end. It's a selfless role, yet a critical one. And this is Mark Cavendish, very famous sprinter, talking about another Aussie, Mark Renshaw, his lead-out man. Protecting or overprotecting. So I'm a new parent, as I mentioned, and I was recently in the States doing a whole bunch of Scrum stuff, and I came across this term a lot, helicopter parenting. Not sure if we use it as much in this country. However, what it's conveying are those parents who sit over the top of their kids with great intent, but at the first sign of any trouble or obstacle, they jump in, bang, resolve the problem, clear the path for their kids. And as I said, this is the intent's really positive. But what's the problem? The problem is we're not equipping our kids with the right tools to be able to solve their own problems. So this is the same thing that we need to look at as a Scrum Master. The understanding of when to jump in and resolve the problem and when to just step back and guide from a distance. And the second can be even more valuable than the first. There's a lot of focus on, one of those key things a Scrum Master does is removing impediments. And when you're a new Scrum Master, you see an impediment, it's like exciting. Yeah, I get to come in and fix it. But remember, it's very important to know when to jump in, when to step back. So a great Scrum Master can enact change without fear, be diplomatic without being political, selfless without downplaying the criticality of their role, and they're protective without being overprotective. Okay, I'm just going to change gear a second now, and I'm going to talk about another issue that I see. So, can I see a show of hands? Who here is an ex-project manager or a project manager? Can I see a show of hands? Yeah, quite a few of you. I've got my hand up. Now, who arrived, say, at this presentation, or at the whole conference, under a very common assumption that the Scrum Master is the Scrum Project Manager? Okay, a few hands there. Now, this is a very wide belief. You are absolutely not alone. There's a very wide belief that the Scrum Master is exactly that, the Scrum Project Manager. Go back to Monster, I'll show you some more evidence here. So I did a search for the Scrum Master role. You can see there. And the top 5 items, while they have Scrum Master in the title, they also have that term Project Manager. So as I said, this is a very common assumption. However, it is actually incorrect. And this is a quote from Mike Cohen, who I mentioned earlier on. Scrum projects, we acknowledge the untenable role of the project manager and eliminate it. So how did this come about? Well, I'm just going to go back into the past a little bit. And this weird Scrum Master title was created by one of the co-creators of Scrum, called Ken Schwaber, who was formulated in 1997 as a reminder that the Scrum Master is not just a project manager plus or minus some extra bits and pieces. That's why he used such a different term. He could have called it Agile Project Manager, Scrum Project Manager. He chose not to do this, to make this differentiation. He also did it to really emphasize the fact that the Scrum vocabulary is a vocabulary for change. And some of you may be going, well, all this lovely talk about self-organizing and servant leading, and yet there's this term Scrum Master. Sounds really command control, doesn't it? I agree. I have a few issues with the title. I think there could be alternatives. However, the master element of it refers to the fact that the Scrum Master is a master of the Scrum process rather than a master of people. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So what happens then to all those important PM functions? We can't just get rid of them, right? They're still projects. We still need to worry about all these things, scope, budget, scheduling. These are all really important things. They don't just disappear. But in Scrum, what happens, they actually get shared. They get split up amongst the key Scrum roles, those being the Scrum Master, the Product Owner, and the Development Team. Martin Kearns tomorrow is actually going to be talking about some alternative functions of a project manager within this environment. That will be very interesting. But Scrum talks about the project management functions being split up amongst these roles. So why is there this tight coupling and this wide belief? Well, I've got a few theories here. The first one is that there's certainly some overlap. Okay? Absolutely, there's overlap. Another issue is that this Scrum Master role is so new and so progressive that there really isn't this legacy function to draw candidates from. So I guess when you don't have a legacy role, you choose one. Choose one that's similar. Another issue I think Mike's quote from Succeeding with Agile is It's pretty hard-hitting, and it can lead to a feeling of existential threat. I was recently traveling as well in Hong Kong, and when I saw some food that I thought might put me under existential threat, I went to familiarity. I admit it. A little bit ashamed, but I admit it. But that's another potential reason why this has happened. Project managers flock to something that's familiar. Scrum Master has the overlap. There you go. So why is this coupling even a problem? Well, the main issue, I feel, is that you can get the wrong people in to do the right job. And whilst many do transition, a lot of transitions are less than stellar. And why is that? A lot of project managers tend to hang on to some of these Scrum incompatible behaviors, as I call them. What are some of these? Some project managers tend to find it hard to let go of this command control authority. It's not easy. It's really, I can say, yeah, we're servant leaders now, but it doesn't always happen. And I'm not saying command control authority is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's different. A lot of project managers are attached to upfront planning. It's hard to let go of this fact that, oh, I don't have this 6-month Gantt chart sitting on my wall. Again, I'm talking about myself here a lot, okay? I had to make this leap. And they continue to enforce these sort of formulaic, rigid procedures. Project managers like order and structure. I like to hang on to those. So the problem is, if project managers are not able to let go of these, it's very difficult to make that transition. But there's good news. Do not worry, there is good news. It is a very, very common transition. I'd say it's the most common transition into that Scrum Master role. And the other good news is that there are successful transitions. I certainly like to think mine was successful, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here. There are books written about the transition. It's probably the most well-known one by Sleeger and Broderick. But the transition can only occur if they can find the inner agilist. You need to be able to drop those incompatible behaviors and embrace those that Scrum also embraces. So quickly, what are these Scrum-compatible functions? A lot of PMs are very protective of their teams. Great. That's good. That works. They're excellent risk and issue managers. That also works. Strong stakeholder managers and excellent at communication. Scrum-compatible. Cool. So can a PM become a Scrum Master? For sure, absolutely. It's no problem. But a big but. It's actually a small but on the presentation. There's a big but. The project manager does not equal the Scrum Master. Okay, remember this. And it is not only ex-project managers who can become Scrum Masters. Remember that the Scrum Master role is not simply a functional list. And it's not the exclusive domain of ex-project managers. PMs do make the transition, and they do make it successfully. But also bear in mind that great Scrum Masters can be hiding in the most strange places. Can everyone see the lizard? My colleague told me to point it out because he's pretty well disguised. And I'd like to leave you with one important point here. Be open-minded. When you leave here and you try and find your Scrum Master or your servant leader, be open-minded as to who they are and where they can come from. And while not anyone can be a Scrum Master, as we saw, it's a deep, complex role, a Scrum Master could be anyone. You could draw them from any area of the business potentially. So I'd like to finish up there and thank you again for coming. And I think we might have time for one question. Just saw it down there, yeah.
doing the Scrum Master role and perhaps another role on the project team, like a BA or a developer. Do you think that that's possible and a good idea?
Okay, that's a really good question. I was discussing this with a colleague just the other day. And it's not wrong. There's no Scrum police that are going to come out and arrest you for doing this, okay? And some will recommend it. And the reality is you may not have budget to get a Scrum Master. However, if possible, and you are going to split this role, I personally prefer if the Scrum Master is working as a Scrum Master across multiple teams, as opposed to taking on board a function of the development team. Why? Well, the Scrum Master is a specialty, okay? It's a deep specialty. Also, when you are on the development team and you are a Scrum Master, you have cross-cutting concerns going on. What are you? Are you a developer? Are you a Scrum Master? What happens if there's an impediment and you're in the middle of doing something? Are you going to be able to jump up and help out? What's your priority? That's the main problem in my book, and I'd rather have the Scrum Master do Scrum Master roles elsewhere if you can't dedicate someone full-time. And I also personally believe for new Scrum teams, it is a full-time role. There is a lot of education, a lot of PR. Forget, as I said, the functions are one thing. It's everything surrounding it. The promotion, internal promotion, education. This takes a lot of time. So, yeah, in a nutshell, I feel moving forward, Scrum Master should be split, if necessary, across multiple Scrum teams rather than act as what they call a developer, BA, etc., in the same team.
Okay, well, we've heard the applause next door, and that's always a sign. I just want to thank you, Ilan, for just some really fascinating original stuff. I love seeing the ads and the way you're calling it out. I've seen that sort of dysfunction my whole time. I mentioned it this morning, that getting your recruitment department to behave and describe the jobs in your teams in a proper way is probably one of the simplest hurdles you can get over and make some real progress. So I'm really looking forward to your book. This is going to be awesome. And I think just show appreciation for Ilan. Ilan, are you here for the next day or so?
I am indeed.
Fantastic.
Yes.
See you.